Hi guys, it's Maya here, and today, unfortunately, I'm going to be talking about JK Rowling, her recent tweets, her not so recent tweets, and her essay that she decided to post on her website. Now, normally I don't like bringing more attention to negativity. However, I feel like with her platform, with her following, her influence, and her wealth, she is already getting the most attention she possibly can. It was even on my national radio this morning when I was listening to my Google Home, and I just feel like I need to put my voice out there and try to combat some of the misinformation that she is spreading and the lack of scientific evidence that she is sharing, and just kind of show the trans perspective on her arguments. Now, this topic is really important to me because, like so many of you guys, I was obsessed with Harry Potter growing up. I absolutely loved it, and as a trans person who, as a child, identified as a girl but could not express that, I found escapism in fantasy. I found magic so fascinating because you could be whoever you wanted to be and you had the power to do so. And so Harry Potter was such a special journey for me to read, and it really helped me forget about a lot of my problems until I was older and able to deal with them. And for that, I was so thankful for JK Rowling. I thought it was amazing that she was a female author and she was able to have such a platform and showcase her talents in such an amazing way. In 6th grade, I even did a public speaking competition where I talked about JK Rowling and how much I admired her and shared her story and her struggles. So it's kind of sad now that she's kind of tarnishing our story as trans women. Now, many months ago, JK Rowling openly tweeted her support of a woman named Maya Forstater. Ironic, I know, because I'm also Maya, but no, she was not supporting me. She was supporting a woman who was going to court over wanting the freedom of speech to misgender trans people in the workplace. She felt that it was her right to be able to refer to them by the pronouns based on their biological sex at birth and not the gender that they were presenting as. Ultimately, the judge did not rule in her favor, and she was basically trying to promote discrimination. People say that she lost her job. However, she was in a contract position and they decided not to renew her contract that year. So kind of crazy that JK Rowling would be defending someone who wants to misgender people in the workplace. Obviously, JK Rowling's stance is that biological sex is the ultimate factor in life, and that how you choose to identify and express yourself does not matter. So she made her opinions on that kind of clear with that support for Maya Forstater. And now, more recently, JK Rowling tweeted, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth." So my issue with this, and I'm not trying to speak for all trans people, but basically from my understanding, most trans people do not seek to erase the idea of sex. Sex is a chromosome that you're born with, and yes, there can be variations, there can be intersex as well. She does not bring that up into conversation, which is kind of annoying. However, we do not deny the existence of the sexes, of female and male at birth. That is kind of what dictates how we will develop as we grow older. Trans people acknowledge this and take steps to transition in order to rectify their experience on Earth to better match their gender identity. So we don't think that sex does not exist. Sex and gender are two different things. Gender is how you express yourself, it's your outward identity, and sex is the scientific DNA that you were born with, your chromosomes, etc. And I acknowledge the fact that sex is very real, that chromosomes are very real. I'm not trying to erase that. Without them, I wouldn't be a trans woman. If they did not exist, then there would be no such thing as being transgender. And we are not trying to stop that and erase all differences between us and cisgender women. There's a reason why we call ourselves trans women. She also goes on to tweet that the idea that women like me, who've been empathetic to trans people for decades, feeling kinship because they're vulnerable in the same way as women, i.e. to male violence, hate trans people because they think sex is real and has lived consequences, is nonsense. I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female. I do not believe it's hateful to say so. No one is saying that it's hateful for JK Rowling to convey her experience in life as a born female woman going through this world. No one says that. No one says that they think it's hateful that she's a cisgender woman and those are her experiences and her oppression based on being a woman in society. No one says that that is hateful. She says that she would march with us if we were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. If we were discriminated on the basis of being trans, which is kind of laughable really, because that's exactly what transgender people are discriminated for, just for existing. And that's why we have pride. That's why we have marches. I'm very confused by this statement and it doesn't really make sense. It's also very confusing how she uses violence from specifically men to create a sense of unity between transgender women and cisgender women. It's really sad that that is one of the only connections that she highlights between us, and it creates this ostracization and focus on negativity. JK Rowling also quote tweets an article called "Creating a More Equal Post-COVID-19 World for People Who Menstruate," and she comments on it saying, "People who menstruate. I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out." And then she goes on to misspell the word woman several times in order to mock the article. So an issue that we have with this mocking is that she's basically erasing the identities of trans men and non-binary people who menstruate. She is, instead of celebrating the inclusivity of people who menstruate, she is just wanting it to be a linear women who menstruate, because she does not acknowledge the identities of trans men and non-binary people, which we will go into more depth later when we get into her essay. Now we're going to dive into JK Rowling's very lengthy essay. In this essay, she basically paints herself and all cisgender women as victims or potential victims of the transgender movement for equality and rights. In this essay, it basically means access to washrooms, change rooms, and being referred to by the correct pronouns. In this essay, she cites various radical feminists, one of them being Magdalene Burns, and she refers to her as a very brave, young, liberating feminist lesbian. And she talks about how lesbians like Magdalene are feeling forced to date transgender women, even though it does not align with their sexual preferences. And from my experience and most people's experiences that I've encountered, no one is forcing lesbians to date trans people. No one is ostracizing them or making them feel bad about it. And if there are micro incidences, it's not a large part of the community. Not only that, Magdalene Burns is a very radical feminist who does not want trans rights at all. She was tweeting this exact excerpt that I'm about to read you, which I will probably have to bleep out. "You are blackface actors. You aren't women. You're men who get sexual kicks from being treated like women. You and your dirty perversions. Our oppression isn't a fetish, you pathetic, sick." So this is someone that JK Rowling has chosen to highlight in her essay, and she has chosen to support and use to support her arguments against transgender women taking up spaces in lesbian communities. Now, transgender women are not fetishists or perverts. We are not putting on a costume. It's very offensive to say so, and this is why a lot of people are just flat out calling JK Rowling transphobic, because she is supporting the people who put out these ideas, and she is vaguely, in very confused wording, also saying the same thing. JK Rowling also frequently talks about how she's on her 4th or 5th cancellation. She cherry picks comments from trolls on the internet to make it seem like she is an enormous victim in this situation just for her free speech. She does not take accountability for her opinions and how they can offend and hurt people's lives, especially trans people's lives. The insults that she is referring to are pretty misogynistic, and obviously they're not okay, but one of them that she highlights the most is the word TERF, which stands for Trans Exclusive Radical Feminism. So basically what that seeks to do is radically uplift feminism for cisgender women and completely exclude the rights of transgender women. Now, it's not so much a slur as it is a terminology used to describe that movement, and it has been synonymous with negativity, so I guess that is why JK Rowling is seeing it as a slur. Now, JK Rowling also goes on to add strength to her defense of her views by saying that many women agree with her. Many people have emailed her, have supported her on Twitter. She goes on to say that many of them are working in the fields of gender dysphoria and transgender people in general, and they work with them and they're part of that space. She does not go on to say what their jobs are, what their qualifications are. For all we know, like, they could be doing any job and happen to just have a coworker who's transgender. We have no idea what qualifications they have. So she is not citing that. And it's very likely that if they were credible people with credible sources, she would have cited them and linked that, because why not? So it just seems like she is pulling these answers and these arguments out of a hat and not really backing them up with any scientific claims or evidence. Time and time again, she refers to transgender people as threatening the rights of cisgender women, or natal women, as she says. She goes on to conflate transgender women in the same instances as Donald Trump being a sexual predator, as the incel movement, which is involuntary celibacy, and also porn culture. She lists all of these negative things that to her have created a more misogynistic world for younger generations of women to live in, namely her daughter. It's very harmful to associate all of these negative things, including being a sexual predator, with transgender women, which she also goes on to talk about how natal women need same-sex spaces separate from trans women because they are at risk of being assaulted. Now, there are no claims to prove that transgender women and transgender men gaining rights in society, basic human rights like using the washroom, using the change room. There's no evidence that it has led to an increase in sexual predators entering women's washrooms. Cisgender men have dressed up as women in the past to enter washrooms for voyeurism and assault, and this is before there were trans rights. This is after there were trans rights. It's small isolated incidents, but it has happened regardless of the transgender movement. And they are not transgender women. They are people who try to use the movement or use a disguise in order to achieve what they want. That is not what the transgender movement is about. That is not transgender women. That is cisgender men assaulting women, which can happen outside of the washroom too. JK Rowling also implies that being transgender is a phase. She talks a lot about young women transitioning into men and then regretting their decision and having to detransition. She doesn't cite any exact sources or evidence for this, and all of the evidence that I've read is actually pointing the opposite way. Rates of desist in transgender men are getting lower and lower. She even conflates her own mental struggles as a youth back in the 80s, I believe, saying that she thinks she could have tried to transition if the opportunity was available. She says, the more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether if I'd been born 30 years later, I too might have tried to transition. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge. I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I'd found community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd preferred. Now, one of the problems with this is that she is taking a very small personal sample of her own thought process growing up, and she is projecting that onto young women. She's saying that they are so impressionable, they cannot speak up for themselves, and it has a lot of internal sexism in it. Transgender people do not make this choice lightly. We do not transition on a whim or because we don't feel happy in the moment. It is a lifelong decision that we make with the risk that everything in our life could fall apart. We could lose job opportunities, we could lose friends, we could lose family. It is a major decision. It's not a, oh, I'll just be the son my father always wanted me to be. I'm just like, I have OCD, I'm unhappy. It's not related to those incidences. It's a completely separate entity. And for JK Rowling to be talking on behalf of all of these young women who either become non-binary or transition into trans men, she is saying that they don't know their own identity, that they don't have their own voices. She essentially believes that many young women are transitioning just because they find it hard to be a woman in society. This implies that it is easier for trans men in society than it is for cisgender women, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, because I would say it's definitely not. One of the TERF ideologies, one of their core beliefs, is that women who transition into trans men are victims of trans ideology and they really are just women. So that is a large staple of what it seems JK Rowling believes in society. JK Rowling also goes on to highlight her own sexual assault story from her ex-husband. And while this is brave of her to come forward about the experience, her reason for doing so is not so noble. She uses this assault that she's experienced at the hands of a cisgender man in order to fearmonger for cisgender women to have bathroom spaces so that they don't fear being assaulted by transgender women or cisgender men who are dressing up as women in her eyes. For JK Rowling to associate the assault of her ex-cisgender husband with transgender women is very confusing. It's not rooted in any kind of material or physical connection, and it just paints us in a negative light. It implies that we are just like the cisgender man that assaulted her, and she wants all women to have as much space as possible away from trans women. Those are most of the topics that I was able to cover in today's video. Obviously her essay is a lot longer and there's a lot more points I could make with a lot more scientific studies to back up the positivity of the trans movement. However, this is just a YouTube video and it's not a response essay, so it's kind of hard to link all of those studies. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope you kind of saw the perspective that a lot of trans people are feeling towards JK Rowling's opinions. And yeah, I don't know, just stay positive. Try not to idolize people too much, I would say, because those people often tend to let you down. I would say just have faith in yourself, and if you need some positivity, go watch my last video. It's all about learning to love yourself as a trans woman, which is a journey that I'm on, and I'm sure many cisgender people are on as well. So if you guys have any more you want to add to the discussion, please be respectful and kind and positive and add it down below in the comments. Don't be afraid to thumbs up this video, comment, rate, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!